The soldier stepped over the scorched bodies, his boots sinking into ash and broken metal. The air thick with smoke, and the stench of burning flesh. He had fought countless battles and believed he knew fear, and yet this was different. The sky above was torn with fire streaks of orange and red painting the clouds like wounds on the face of the world. He clenched his jaw and tightened his grip on his weapon, the weight of it grounding him in a world that seemed to crumble with every heartbeat. He moved forward through the rubble of alien towers, shattered and splintered, reaching up like broken fingers, begging for mercy, or warning, or perhaps both. Every step brought a crunch beneath him, the bones of machines and the remains of creatures he had only seen in hollow archives, now twisted and lifeless beneath his gaze. He expected silence after the fighting, but the silence was loud and heavy. Almost accusing. He thought of victory of metals and the roar of his comrades, but all he felt was emptiness and the absence of triumph the wind carried. Strange scents, metal and ozone, and something sweet like flowers that should not exist in a place like this. He paused and lifted his eyes, and then he saw her standing amidst the ruins, her figure alone and unbroken, her posture proud and defiant. The light caught her in a way that made the fire and smoke seem softer around her. She did not look scared or pleading. She looked like the city itself had poured into her and made her stronger. Then the stones and steel crumbled at her feet. He froze. The world seemed to slow. The wind and fire paused. Even the distant screams seemed muffled, as if reality itself was holding its breath. She did not move toward him, and she did not move away. Her eyes found his and held them like a challenge or a dare or a warning. He did not know which, and yet he felt drawn to her like a tide pulled by an invisible moon. He took a cautious step and then another. The ground cracked beneath him. Dust rose in clouds around them. The silence was so complete, it pressed against his chest. He raised his weapon not to harm but because it was the only thing he knew to do. Yet his fingers trembled, and the princess did not flinch. She simply waited, and in that waiting, he felt the first stirrings of doubt and curiosity and fear all mingled together, and he realized that claiming her as victory might be far more complicated than he had ever imagined. He lowered his weapon slightly, but did not release it. Every instinct screamed at him to control her, to claim her, as he had been trained to claim spoils of war. Yet something in her presence made him hesitate. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and impossible questions. She tilted her head ever so slightly, as if studying him as carefully as he was studying her. The ruins of her city stretched behind her towers, twisted into shapes that resembled claws and wings, shadows crawling over broken walls, the ground littered with fragments of her world, and yet she seemed untouched by it all, like she had been born from the chaos and not damaged by it. He took another step closer and noticed the fine details of her clothing glowing faintly with symbols he did not recognize, patterns that pulsed like living fire. Her eyes flicked to his hand on the weapon, and then back to his face, and for a moment, the soldier felt exposed, as if she could see everything he had done, everything he had wanted, and everything he had feared. He forced himself to focus, yet the closer he moved, the more alive she seemed, each step a challenge, each blink a defiance. He felt a pull in his chest and a tension in his muscles that he had never experienced in battle before. She did not speak, yet her gaze spoke volumes. She dared him to act. She dared him to claim her, and yet warned him that any wrong move would cost him everything. He had won. The sky above rumbled, and sparks of fire drifted past, like falling stars or shattered dreams. The smoke curled and twisted around them, hiding and revealing the remnants of her city, and he realized the destruction could not match the strength she radiated. She was not fragile and she was not broken. She was the storm, and he was just the man standing in its path. He tried to measure his next move, to predict her intentions, but every thought seemed inadequate to the reality of her presence, and for the first time in his life, he felt like the war he had fought, the victories he had taken, the medals he had earned, meant nothing compared to the challenge of standing before her and understanding what she really was. And in that moment he understood that claiming her as victory was no longer about possession, it was about survival, understanding, and perhaps something far more dangerous than war itself. Princess did not move. She remained still, as if rooted to the ground. The soldier's every instinct screamed at him to act, to seize her, and yet he could not bring himself to step closer. Something about the way she held herself made the air heavier and sharper, as if every breath he took was measured against her will. He lowered his weapon further, letting it hang loosely at his side, his boots crunching against rubble that smelled of burnt ozone and alien flora. The silence between them was not empty. It was alive. It whispered with the echoes of the city that had fallen around them. Every shard of glass, every twisted beam, every scorched wall seemed to hum in response to her presence. He wanted to speak to her, to break the stillness, and yet when he opened his mouth the words died on his tongue, like ashes in the wind. He tried to read her expression, to guess her next move, but her face was a mask of calm and curiosity that gave nothing away. The sky above bled fire and smoke streaking across the horizon, and the distant echoes of collapsing towers and groaning metal made him aware of the fragility of the world around them. Yet she stood, as if the chaos was only a backdrop to her being. She shifted her weight ever so slightly, and he felt it in his chest like a ripple of energy that passed from her to him, and back again. He realized then that she was testing him, and he had no idea what the rules were. The wind whipped through the ruined streets, carrying scents he could not identify, something floral, something metallic, something raw and alive. He inhaled deeply, feeling it twist inside him, reminding him of battles fought and lost, of comrades burned and broken, of victories that tasted like ash. He wanted to understand her, to know if she would strike, if she would flee, if she would laugh at him, if she would destroy him, in an instant. And yet every second he waited brought him closer to an awareness that he had never known before, that he was not in control of this moment, that she held something far greater than any weapon he had ever wielded. Her eyes glowed faintly with colors he could not name, and he felt drawn into them, unable to look away, unable to act, unable to leave the space between them unfilled. And then she moved, not toward him, but just a flicker of motion, a tilt of her head, a subtle shift in the light that fell across her face, and the world seemed to shiver and hum around them. The silence became almost unbearable, full of potential energy, ready to snap at any second, and he felt his heart pound in a rhythm that matched the quiet pulse he sensed from her, like they were connected by something invisible and ancient and dangerous. And he realized with a mixture of fear and awe that this was no ordinary human, nor ordinary alien. This was something else, something alive and unpredictable, and he had no choice but to follow the rules she set, and to wait to see what she would do next. He lifted her gently from the cracked ground, her weight surprising him lighter than he imagined, yet solid and warm against his chest. The ruins stretched endlessly around them, twisted metal and stone jutting like broken teeth. Smoke curled in ribbons through the air, and ash drifted like snow across the battlefield. He stepped cautiously over debris, careful not to trip or jostle her. Her eyes followed every movement, taking in the shattered landscape, as if memorizing it, and he felt the pressure of her gaze like a heartbeat against his chest. They moved together in silence, past the skeletons of alien ships, their hulls split open, exposing glowing circuits and tangled limbs. The wind howled between the towers, carrying strange cries and distant explosions that shook the ground beneath his feet. He could feel the vibration through the soles of his boots. The princess rested her head lightly against his shoulder, her fingers brushing against his arms, sparking a shiver. He did not understand. They walked through the devastation, and he realized that each step was a test, each glance from her a challenge he could not yet meet. He wondered what she was thinking, plotting, waiting, judging him, and he knew he was no longer the hunter, he was no longer in control. And as they disappeared into the shadowed streets of the fallen city, he understood that the journey ahead would be far more dangerous than the battle that had brought them here. The nights were different from anything he had known. The sky above still burned with distant fires and drifting embers, but the air carried a strange quiet that pressed against his ears and made him aware of every breath, every step, every sound. The princess walked beside him, her silhouette outlined by the flickering light of the dying city. She did not speak, but her presence spoke louder than any words could. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, tracing his movements, and he felt them like a pulse at the back of his mind. He wanted to break the silence, to ask her questions, to understand her, but each time he opened his mouth, the words faltered and died on his tongue. Instead, he watched her as she observed the ruins, moving with a grace that seemed impossible among the rubble, each step careful, deliberate, her fingers brushing against walls and debris, almost as if she could read the story of the city through touch. And he wondered what memories she carried, what losses she had endured, how she could remain so strong when everything around her had fallen apart. He felt a tension coil in his chest between fear and fascination. Every glance from her was a challenge and a temptation, and he knew he was not prepared for either, yet he could not turn away. They stopped at the edge of a collapsed tower. She crouched beside the rubble, studying something he could not see, and he crouched too, his eyes tracing the faint glow of alien inscriptions etched into broken stones. He did not understand their meaning, but she seemed to draw power from them, like they whispered secrets only she could hear. He watched her, and realized that this was the first time he had truly seen her vulnerability and strength at once, and the realization made his heart pound. She rose and turned to him for the first time in the night, her gaze meeting his, and he felt an unspoken question hang between them, something he could not answer, something he did not know how to respond to, and yet he understood that whatever came next would not be dictated by force or command, it would be dictated by understanding, patience, and perhaps something deeper that he had never felt before. And as the wind carried the echoes of the ruined city around them, he felt a pull toward her that was not desire nor duty, but something more dangerous, more urgent, more alive than anything he had ever faced. She moved with a grace that defied the chaos around them, slipping through the ruins like a shadow. He tried to follow, but every step he took she seemed to anticipate vanishing and reappearing, just out of reach, leaving him frustrated and bewildered. The soldier's mind raced, trying to predict her next move, trying to understand if she was testing him, punishing him, or simply playing with him. Every glance from her carried a weight he could not measure, a challenge he could not meet. He wanted to command her to stay, to obey, to yield, but each time he opened his mouth, she tilted her head slightly, or flicked her eyes toward him, and he felt the pull of her will stronger than any weapon he had ever wielded. She paused atop a shattered wall, and looked down at him, her eyes glowing faintly like distant stars, and he realized she was daring him to understand that this was not a game of possession but of respect and fear and curiosity all tangled together. He took a deep breath and tried to meet her gaze fully, to show her he was present and aware, that he was willing to learn the rules she set rather than impose his own. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of smoke and alien flora, and in that instant he understood that every step forward would require patience, every glance and gesture would need careful thought, and that her defiance was not resistance for its own sake but a measure of the bond forming between them, a bond he could not yet name or control. And he knew that claiming her as a prize was no longer possible. She had already claimed him, and the path ahead would be determined not by war but by understanding and trust. She led him deeper into the ruins, past walls that had once been grand, and corridors filled with echoes of lives long gone. Her hands traced broken symbols glowing faintly in the dim light, and he watched her carefully, trying to memorize every movement, every gesture, as if they contained secrets he could never read. She paused in a chamber half collapsed, and held up a crystal that shimmered with images of her world, cities of light and beauty now shattered and twisted into ruins. She turned it in her hands, and the images shifted, showing people laughing, running, dancing, loving, and losing, and he realized that she carried the memory of her entire civilization within her grasp. She did not speak, yet he felt her voice in the images, in the way she moved and the way she looked at him, and he understood for the first time that she was not merely a princess but a keeper of history, of hope, of survival. She handed him the crystal, and he felt its warmth and weight as if it pressed against his chest. The visions flooded his mind for an instant, and he saw her world, the colors, the sounds, the lives, the loss, the fire and the grief. He could feel her sorrow and pride and fury all at once, and he understood that she had not been broken by war, she had been forged by it, that her defiance was not cruelty but strength, and that any claim of victory over her was meaningless. She had already survived everything the universe had thrown at her, and she would survive him too, and he knew then that whatever path lay ahead, it would not be dictated by conquest or force, but by the fragile, tentative trust slowly forming between them, a trust that could save or destroy them both. He looked at her and saw, not a prize but a force that could not be contained, the weight of her history and strength pressed against his chest, and he realized that victory was not in claiming her but in surviving her trust. He lowered his weapon completely, and let his hands fall to his sides, feeling a strange lightness and terror. All at once the princess watched him carefully, her eyes glowing softly as if reading the shift in his thoughts. He felt a tremor in his chest that was not fear or anger but something deeper and more fragile, a recognition that the path forward would require patience and understanding, that he could not command her, only follow and adapt. And for the first time he welcomed the uncertainty. She brought the storm of her presence, and he understood that his role had changed from conqueror to companion, from victor to protector, and the future that had seemed so clear and predictable was now alive with possibility and peril, and he felt a thrill he could not name. They emerged from the ruins together, the fire and smoke of the fallen city behind them casting long shadows across the ground. He felt her presence beside him, not as a captive but as a partner, a force equal to his own. Every step they took was careful, deliberate, yet unspoken understanding passed between them like a current of light in the darkness. She glanced at him briefly, and he felt a jolt through his chest, stronger than any battle, adrenaline stronger than fear, stronger than triumph. They walked through streets of shattered towers and broken monuments, her hand brushing against his arm, lightly sending sparks of energy. He could not explain the wind-carried whispers of the past, echoes of lives lost, and he felt them all mingling with the strange quiet between them. He realized that nothing about this journey was predictable, that victory had no meaning here, that the bond forming between them was more dangerous, more powerful than any weapon, more valuable than any reward. And as they disappeared into the horizon, the ruined city behind them, he understood that the story was not over, that their paths were now intertwined, not by war or conquest, but by trust, understanding, and the fragile, impossible promise of something new and unstoppable.